Welcome to AWS reInvent. My name is Oren Nachman. I'm a Senior Development Manager at AWS, and you are here to hear about incident management in a distributed organization. This is BLD 208. So who is this session for? So if you care about building and operating reliable and available applications, this talk is for you. And that should be everyone, so welcome. What are we going to talk about today? So we're going to run through at a very high level, because obviously we'll go into depth soon. We're gonna run through how Amazon's culture impacts how we do incident mitigation, and we're gonna talk about customer obsession. We're gonna talk about ownership. We're gonna talk about bias for action, insist on high standards, learn and be curious, and we're gonna break those down into the various mechanisms that we use at Amazon, split up according to some of those leadership principles and how they apply quite literally to our day-to-day. So what are the Amazon leadership principles? So Amazon has a set of leadership principles that start from customer obsession and go through to delivery, and everything else in the middle helps us chart that journey between those two. And various journeys will take different paths depending on what the scenarios are, and that's what we're going to do soon. We're going to chart that path from customer obsession to deliver results as we're looking at from an incident perspective, right? And again, obviously the purpose of incident mitigation is you want to mitigate customer impact because you, just like us, are customer obsessed. You don't want your customers to experience any kind of impact to the services that you are providing to them. And of course, that journey is again gated. The shining north stars that we're going to be looking at are those two on the edges. So leadership principles by themselves are a wonderful framing mechanism that allows you to have common discussions and evaluate how you're doing in certain areas, but by themselves, they're not enough, right? By themselves, they're just pretty words up on a wall. So the way we do things at Amazon is that we take those leadership principles and we apply various mechanisms to those leadership principles in order to bring them to life. And so let's dive in a little bit, talk about like what a mechanism actually is. So a mechanism allows us to avoid what we call good intentions. And there's a story from Jeff Bezos, our CEO, about shadowing a customer support representative and seeing them get in a customer complaint about a damaged table and then immediately issuing a refund without even checking kind of the details. And when they were discussing through it, the question came up like, why were you so quick to offer that refund, right? Like, why were you not trying to like fix the table or to understand what was going on? And the customer rep said, oh, I know all about this table. This comes in all the time. This table is not packed properly. It's constantly being damaged. And Jeff realized at that point that while we have this amazing intention of being customer obsessed, that's actually not what the customer wants. Like, the customer doesn't want the refund. The customer wants the table. And so they went and drove a mechanism to allow customer service representatives to actually give customers what they want. And in this case, that was implementing an and-on code where any customer service representative can go into an item and flag it and say, there is a significant problem with this item, fix it before selling any more of them. And that is where a mechanism comes into play. It's not just taking the intention of customer obsession, it's applying a mechanism to allow that customer obsession to actually be put into practice. So what does a mechanism look like? So the first thing is a tool. So we'll use that example from before. It's kind of that and-on code. For incident management, this could be things like ways to engage your folks. It could be ways to manage your incident. It could be your runbooks, etc. But it is a tool. Ideally something automated, but it could be something written down. And then you have to drive adoption. We all know what it's like to build something really cool, to build that one script that does everything, and then if no one uses it though, it's kind of useless. So you build the tool, you drive adoption, but then that's not enough by itself, because then you also need to have an inspection. And inspection by itself is its own mechanism as part of this pie circle of what a mechanism makes up. And the idea behind inspection is that you take that mechanism and you inspect it. You gather feedback. You gather feedback from people using the mechanism, using those tools, and you gather feedback from the people that are affected by that mechanism. So, for example, in the case of the and-on code, you would gather feedback on the and-on code, but also feedback from the actual customers that are impacted by it. And then that drives a flywheel where you build a tool, you drive adoption, and then you inspect it, right? This is a verification mechanism, and you drive changes back into the tool so that you have this beautiful flywheel that continuous improvement around that mechanism. So we have leadership principles and we have mechanisms. But at Amazon, we still recognize that while this is it's a fun magic sauce kind of algorithm, it's not enough yet. There's still one significant missing component, and that component is people. It's your folks. Because again, you could have amazing leadership principles, and we could have some incredible mechanisms we put into place, and people could actually use them, but if your people are not really on board with it, they're not part of that inspection mechanism, for example, they're not passionate about actually adopting the new mechanisms, versus being forced on them, etc., you're not moving very far. And the way we like to think about it internally, because we're constantly on this journey, is that the journey to the modern cloud-enabled enterprise is mostly about transforming people and how they operate. Because operations does not come naturally to most people, right? Even software developers, systems development engineers, etc. We mostly want to build, and that's brilliant. At Amazon, we're all builders, but we also need to be operators, and we also need to have that wonderful combination that takes the leadership principles to guide us, the mechanisms to help take our guiding intentions and actually do something with them, and then we take the people who are the glue that sticks everything together. So as this is a quick segue, because we're about to dive in, as an example service here, not to pick on any kind of real services, we are going to take a look at the banana stand service. And the banana stand service actually is a very real service, although not a digital one, that distributes bananas for free to folks in Seattle. Definitely something to check out the next time you're up there. But for the purposes of today, it's a very basic service. We have an Amazon API gateway that drives traffic into AWS Lambda. We have a couple of different Lambdas. We have a distributor, a request handler, and an orchestrator, and everything is stored at the back from DynamoDB in a DynamoDB table. So let's dive in. This is what you're here for. So ownership. This is a quote that should resonate with a lot of people, especially if you're doing DevOps. Giving developers operational responsibilities has greatly enhanced the quality of the service, both from a customer and a technology point of view. Now, you build it, you run it is something that, especially if you're in a kind of a DevOps culture, this is kind of obvious to you. But this is from Dr. Vogel's from 2006. This is how Amazon internally has kind of grown up. And we have iterated on this a bunch, and we're still on this iteration, right? It's a really fun journey of just continuous improvement. And this is really what we're going to be diving into from now on. So the first thing that we look at is, from an ownership perspective, is actually giving people ownership. Now, we structure our teams internally as two pizza teams. Two pizza referring to the size. Yes, it depends on the size of the pizza and how hungry people are. But we're generally looking at somewhere between 8 and 12. There is a bunch of literature online about how we structure the teams. But the main thing is what we give our teams. Our teams will often be multidisciplinary and will own multi-layers. They will own an end-to-end solution. It's very rare that we would have, a back-end team and a front-end team. Unless we specifically had a reason to split it up like that, we will generally have a team that will own their storage layer. They'll own their, incoming infrastructure on the front end. They'll own the actual front end, the middleware if needed. And that allows them to focus on an end-to-end solution. And that means that they're not just focusing on what do I need to deliver as a small discrete piece of functionality, but they're also thinking about the end-to-end. I own this thing, so they'll own the business case, but they'll also own the operations. So, for example, what that means is that when you go to define KPIs for, how is this functionality, this service, this product, how is this operating, you define your own KPIs and you actually push them upwards. So there are no KPIs that come down from on high and then a drip down, but rather we push KPIs upwards, and then other people will learn from that, and it's a really great way of kind of distributing some of those learnings. That team is also the first contact for alarms. Something goes wrong with that service. This team is the team that gets engaged or paged or whatever mechanisms you may use for getting in touch with your resolvers, and that instills a sense of ownership, because this isn't like, oh, I've got code, I've deployed it, CI/CD, etc., but I've deployed it and it's done, and now I might get engaged at some point if there's some big escalation. No, if something's wrong, I'm going to get engaged, or one of my teammates. We manage our operational environments. We have self-managed. Obviously, we have lots of mechanisms that allow us to do, so for example, like Trusted Advisor, where we use a bunch of rules to make sure that we're meeting minimum standards, and our minimum standards are pretty high bar. But the way you structure that, the way you run it, the way you operate it is up to you as a team. We also practice a lot of safe operations, so a lot of automation, which we'll see soon, versus kind of manual and ad hoc. and we automate as much as possible, right? And even on those automations, we make sure to put guardrails. We have things like two-person reviews where you can run a tool, but it needs approval from someone else to make sure that all the inputs of the tool are correct. We do model change management, where we have change management processes that run through various reviews and again encourage automation. And we use a lot of standard services such as Amazon CloudWatch, AWS CloudTrail, etc. And again, to bring in a very common set so that no matter what team you're on, at least from a baseline perspective, we'll generally have kind of similar approach to where our data lives and how we're processing it from an operational point of view. And one actually example that you can see for real world ownership, just in terms of how it actually works, not necessarily in an operations point of view, I would encourage you to check out BLD 202, Owners Up, Building Technology Standards at Amazon Scale from Mark Brooker. Just for a real life example of how ownership works at a 2-pizza team level. So let's start talking about some extra mechanisms here. So mechanism number 1 for ownership, mechanism number 2, other than the 2-pizza team, is the game day. And this is where you test your service in reality. Now, you can actually do testing in prod as well, but that's probably a subject for its own session. But like you're testing all of your you do insane amounts of testing. I'm sure that your CI/CD pipelines have crazy amounts of testing. I'm sure you have QA teams. Some of you will have QA teams. But how about testing your operations? And that's where the game day comes in. We provide a safe, fun environment so that people don't look at this as a chore to actually practice operating the service. And we start. So the way it works for us is we will generally assign a game master. The game master will create a scenario. The scenario will generally be out there. Like it might be a combination of 3 different things happening, which we would never have considered. We'll often try and find gaps in our runbooks, right? Because it's easy to, if you create a game day scenario that's just like, okay, open up this runbook, follow step 1, 2, 3. You want to test that as well because it's a really great mechanism to refresh your runbooks, right? You want to know that your runbooks are working. When you have a real incident, you want to find issues before that. But you also want to test things that are like way out there that you've never thought about before. You want to also make sure that you bring in the whole team. So the whole team sits in a room or virtually, it doesn't matter, but they're all together. And you designate one person to, we kind of designate one person to drive the resolution so people can follow along on their screen. But everyone's generally investigating. People are calling things out. There are ideas coming through. You have a note taker who's compiling kind of follow-up notes for later on. And it's a really, really great way to stress test your runbooks, your operational environment in a relaxed manner. And then, of course, you want to make sure you're not impacting prod. There is nothing necessarily wrong with running a game day in prod if you have the correct guardrails in place. If you have not done that before, though, I would highly recommend doing it in a pre-prod. That is not always realistic for some services, right? You just the reality of pre-prod versus prod. You really need prod, so you want to carve some things off. Make sure that you're not impacting customers ever, right? Don't impact customers to run a game day. That's kind of counterintuitive. But you want to make sure you have a realistic environment there. Another mechanism that we use is the operations meeting, the ops meeting, and we actually run this at lots of different levels. So it runs pretty much all the way up to the top, and it is part of that inspection mechanism. It is so the AWS wide one is a super massive meeting, right? We have there's a lot of people that will attend this, and it has a really, really tight focus on operations. The way it generally works is that we will start and open with sharing and celebrating wins. And again, this is all focused on operational wins, right? If you have business wins, that's brilliant, but keep those to your various business review meetings. You want to share and celebrate operational wins. I remember a win that was shared about someone optimizing their JVM memory usage. And I remember looking at that and going like, oh my goodness, that actually sounds applicable to our scenario. And went off and implemented that same win on our end. These are also obviously sent out wider than just those folks that are in the meeting. We then review operational events. We'll talk about the COE process, the correction of error process, a little bit later. But we will review large, impactful, customer impacting operational events from the last week. And again, the point is to share the learnings, right? So the idea here is to learn from others in this kind of central inspection portion. And then we'll review service metrics. And the way we actually review service metrics is that we have a large wheel, which we'll see in a second, and we'll select someone at random, and we will deep dive into their Dashboards. And I don't forget the question, like, isn't that really intimidating? Like, you've got hundreds, thousands of people all looking at a dashboard, sending through comments, etc. And yes, it is a little bit intimidating the first time you do it. But then you very quickly realize that actually no one is targeting you, right? The feedback that they've got or the questions they're asking is we're all here for the same thing. That customer obsession, deliver results, tangle. Where the questions that you will get and the feedback that you will get will actually help inform how you drive your service metrics forward, as well as allowing other people to learn from you, right? I've seen people ask questions about, like, why do you track this metric? That's an interesting, I've never seen that before. Or why are you tracking P100 here versus P99.9? And there are usually very good reasons for that are then applicable to other services. So what does that wheel look like? So you can actually, this is the original wheel that we used to use when AWS was of a more kind of smaller size, I would say. Obviously, we've scaled a little bit beyond that. You can actually download the wheel that we use in our weekly one. It's open source. The link is currently on the screen. But then again, the idea is that this is not a non-blame mechanism. This is a come in and learn inspection mechanism. Let's move to bias for action. So we've talked about how we do setup kind of pre an incident. So we're talking about things like, so this is essentially okay, I structured my teams, I practice my operations, etc. And now I'm about to go on call. So the first thing that I need to make sure is that when I go on call, I have the right tooling to actually drive immediacy, right? You never want to stress people, but you want to have a little bit of a sense of pressure, right? You don't want people feeling relaxed. So the way you do that is when an incident happens, you want to have individual engagement. And this can be, I've seen a wide array of ways of doing this. You want to have paging, right? Ideally not with an old pager, but probably paging to like an app on your phone. You emails, texts. I've seen people using Slack messages, all sorts of other kind of direct mechanisms. But just you want to make sure that you are getting hold of a person immediately. You also want to have global awareness. This is really important when you are in a larger organization where you have lots of moving parts. If someone's about to start some kind of deployment manually, or they're about to start some kind of change, you probably want them to know that there is some large impact, if large impact is in fact happening. So for example, for us, we have a little red klaxon that pops up on key websites internally, just to let you know that, hey, it's totally all right if you continue doing what you're doing, but please just assess the impact. Make sure that the impact that's happening over here will have no impact on you, or that you're not going to make it even worse, which would be horrible. You also want to make sure that you have tooling. Again, I've seen a kind of wide range here. Some people will use their regular kind of task tracking systems. Some people have specific incident user interfaces. Those are all okay as long as it's clear that you are currently looking at an incident, right? It's totally all right to use a task UI, but if the task UI, if it just looks like a regular sprint task and is prioritized like a sprint task, you're not going to get the engagement that you really want to have. The next one that's up is Tenets. So I just got engaged. My pager just went off. I've clicked the link to go in to look at my incident dashboard. I want to go see what's going on, but what's my first step? What is the first thing that I do? And you want to make sure that this is not a question that people have to ask at 3 o'clock in the morning, because we know that hopefully the vast majority of the time something goes wrong, someone will be in the office, everyone's awake, but we all know that every now and then, sadly, something will happen that wakes you up in the middle of the night. And you want to make sure that this is not something you have to think about too much. You know what your first step is going to be. So for that, we set tenets. And at Amazon, we have a very well-defined set of the tenets that we want to apply during an incident. So the question is, what is the first thing I want to do? Do I want to resolve impact? I actually don't. Do I want to root cause? No. Do I want to fix the root cause? No. I mean, some of these might happen during the incident, but that's not the first thing I'm looking to do. That's not the guide and the shining light there. Do I want to debrief? Also very important, but no. Do I want to do relationship management? Again, very important, but I probably need to pull someone else in from that for that to happen. Do I want to do Git blame? I mean, you know the answer to that one. The tenet that you want front and center, that you want internally, right? This is for the way Amazon does it. The tenet that we want front and center is, my goal as an incident resolver is to mitigate impact. Does that mean resolving the impact? No, it doesn't. There's a very big difference between, okay, I'm putting in a Band-Aid, right, that mitigates the impact while I can resolve the actual impact properly afterwards. That's a very big difference. Right? It might take hours to resolve the impact properly, whereas a Band-Aid can take a small amount of time. Now, of course, if you're using a Band-Aid, you need to make sure it'll scale, that it's not going to go down again in 10 seconds, right? The worst thing you want to have is this kind of flapping thing. But you want to mitigate your impact. And then after that, we can take care of resolving, we take care of root causing, we can take care of pushing the right code fix, etc. And this is how we train our teams. Of course, this will not work necessarily for all organizations. You pick and choose and see how it works, within your frameworks. Detection of impact at scale. So one of the things that we have is that as we grew larger and larger, and as our products grew more and more complex, it got a little bit harder to say, like, okay, I'm the resolver for the banana stand. I've just gotten engaged. What's actually wrong? Is banana stand actually impacted? Like, is the whole thing, what's the impact to my customers? So the way we do this is that we use aggregation. The main way that we do this is that we will draw arbitrary circles, well, semi-arbitrary circles around each of our kind of microservice or infrastructure pieces. So for example, here, API Gateway, the Lambdas and Dynamo, and then we will use aggregation to look at that as a whole. So each one of those will have their own metrics that are very detailed, and they'll bubble up aggregated metrics, and then we will aggregate those aggregated metrics into the health of the banana stand service. And the way we do that is by using CloudWatch. The first thing we do is we have dashboards, and we'll generally have high-level dashboards like you're seeing here, which allow folks to kind of dive in deeper, right? You can see kind of the links at the top to allow us to dive deeper. This is just a sample. Obviously, you structure it. Structures are obviously very team dependent, and folks have lots of different ways of putting things together. And then the aggregation itself, we will use CloudWatch composite alarms. They have a nifty little language, or you can do it through the UX, where you can say, hey, take all these alarms, put them together, and boom, here is your single alarm that represents the conditions that you've set for that composite alarm. So the next mechanism is centralized handling of large-scale cross-team impact. So this is, again, a mechanism that we had to implement once we grew to a really large size, where we realized that when a lot of things, when something, especially something fundamental, goes wrong, it will cause cascading impact to a lot of other teams. All those teams are then that are impacted. They all come into an incident, and they all start investigating. And parallel investigation generally is a good thing, but not if they're all investigating the same thing, because then you're not moving ahead. So this central team, and you want them to be highly technical because they need to understand what's going on. So these are not just folks they're not like incident secretaries. These are technical coordinators of your incident. And they're there to say, okay, there is aggregate impact right now across lots of different services. Let's pull everybody into the same incident. Let's get them all coordinating in the same chat room or conference call or whatever mechanism the team happens to be using. And let's make sure that there's a logical flow of those investigations where, yes, we're all doing it in parallel, but we're all investigating different pieces. Maybe we can tell people that, like, the suspected root cause of this is a dependency, so go dive into there and just double check that, so that you can then focus on actual mitigation once you've ruled out some of the root cause bits and pieces. And you're also keeping a bit of a pulse check there to make sure that things are still moving. So what do those folks do during peacetime? Because obviously incidents are rare. So they're actually building a bunch of KPIs that they use to assess how well different teams are at mitigating incidents. And again, while teams drive their own KPIs, there's nothing wrong with some inspection mechanisms to go off and help inspect that from a more global perspective. So we've had our incident, we've dived in, I was engaged, etc. Now I want to make sure that I'm learning from the incident. And this is where insist on high standards plus learn and be curious comes together. They come together because it's really hard to insist on high standards if you don't have that learn and be curious. Because learn and be curious is the mechanism, or is the leadership principle in this case, that will actually drive you to know where that high standard is. And then insist on high standards will say, okay, now I've learned what that is, now I'm going to go drive that in. The mechanism that we use for this is the core leaders. And one of the mechanisms we use for this is core leaders. The unofficial quote of the core leaders is, lead me, follow me, get out of my way. Thank you, General George Patton. And this exemplifies what a core leader is. So what is a core leader? So core leaders are a decentralized virtual team of incident mitigation subject matter experts. These are a very small group of folks, right? So when you're looking at somewhere between the 10 to 20 people, not more than that, because you want to keep people who are well respected in the community, who have been on a lot of different incidents, and will come in to help that central team that we just spoke about before when there's too many moving parts and when big decisions have to be made. So the problem is that when you want to bias for action, we spoke about it a little bit before, when you want to bias for action, part of that is actually making and driving some decisions. But sometimes it's unclear who makes those decisions. The centralized team are way too invested in the incident. They're coordinating a bunch of things that are going on. They're investigating themselves. They're helping out teams. Too invested. So you bring in a core leader who steps out, who's one step removed from that, and they're the voice of reason. They're going to come in, and they're going to say, give me a sit rep. And they're going to say, okay, I want to know all the actions that are happening right now. And we're going to start coordinating those to make sure that the order of operations is correct. Oh, you would like to pause all CI/CD pipelines. All right, that's why I'm here. Let's make the decision. Show me the data. What's the customer impact? How do we work around this? Oh, we need to go escalate to, whoever it is. Great, let's do it. So these are the, I would say, the fallback mechanism on the central team when things are really bad. You want to make sure that you're engaging them very infrequently, because again, the whole point is that these folks this is not their 100% day job. They go on call for a certain period and that's it. There's a small group of them so that they're going on call often enough that they stay in the game. But not too often that you're burning them out. And then as part of that, again, we want to keep it small, and you always want to maintain a bit of a cohort of shadows because naturally people will move in and out. People are busy; they need someone to step in. So these are kind of the little extra mechanisms. So this is it's a tree of mechanisms, right? You have the core leader, and then you have how you run the core leader program. And then we touched on this a little bit before. So as the banana stand, we had an incident. We ran through the dashboards. We saw the dashboards. There was a problem. We dove into it. We fixed the problem now. We may or may not have had to engage that central team. Maybe even got a core leader in because there was significant impact to our banana stand. But now, how do we actually learn from that? How do we prevent this from happening again tomorrow? And this isn't just about root causing. This is about identifying the fundamentals of the incident, the fundamentals of how the root cause even came to be. Or also, in addition, how was my incident mitigation? Like, how was my incident mitigation process? Was it good? Did I do a good job as a resolver, etc.? So COE is a blameless mechanism for learning from our mistakes, our errors, and resolving root causes and driving continuous improvement. But the most important thing here is the blameless. I just reviewed a COE from a first COE that someone has ever written on my team yesterday. So it was a relatively new hire. Had the very bad luck of getting being the first time they were on call, first really big ticket of the month, and we've decided to do a COE on it because of a bunch of various bits and pieces that happened. And one of the biggest things that we drove into this person was that he felt, because of the ownership that we've driven into some of these folks, he felt so responsible that in his first draft of the COE, it was all about like, I did this, and I should have done this, and I made a mistake here. And it's like, no, this is my failing. This is the team's failing, and it's a team-wide error, right? That someone should even feel like that, right? Oh, this was missing. It's a problem with the runbook. It's a problem with whatever other mechanism that we're looking at, within the incident. And you're focusing on everything to do with the incident, the pre, post, and in incident. So let's take a look at an example. And again, this is a very light example, just based on based on the banana stand. Number one is the who, what, where, and why. Banana stand was unavailable for 90 minutes due to a misconfigured API gateway. Okay, what data do I have to prove this, to back this up? Visual, ideally. What was the impact to our customers and their business? Did we manage to catch this just before customers even noticed, which is the best kind of incident, still an incident, but the best kind? Or no, were they actually impacted? And then the analysis. How was it detected? Well, it was detected through an alarm, but could I have halved detection time? It's always a great question to ask. How would you have halved detection time? Well, we were using 5-minute metrics, big no-no, instead of 1-minute metrics, or maybe even 1-second metrics for critical ones. Mitigation investigation was hampered, by false positives in the logs, etc. So we're already starting to learn like how we could be better next time. Incident was caused by how did we get to this? We were correlated deployments during the impact time, etc. What was the timeline? Really important. We have the timeline. People can take a look at it and see like when things happened, poke on that. And then we ask 5 whys. This is where we dive really deep. Why? Customers couldn't get their bananas. Why? 500s. Why? API gateway couldn't contact. Why? It was misconfigured. Why? Because we deployed a misconfiguration. Well, that's pretty obvious, right? Why? How did we even get to that point that we could? Well, we didn't have the right tests. Aha. Now I've found an extra solution here. And then what are the lessons learned? We need better test coverage. We need to hit our endpoints just like customers do, and not just internal behind the VPC. We want to make sure that our resolvers are actually in a game day to practice. And then we have the action items. And it is incredible what you can learn from the action items that other people can learn from your action items and pick those up as items that they want to take as well. So thank you so much for spending the last 30 minutes with me. I would like to just recap very quickly. The number one thing that you want to do, of course, is earn the trust of your customers during an incident. The way to do that is to empower your engineers by providing them with the training and the setup, the tools that they need ahead of time. You want to use some really great mechanisms which avoid good intentions. Oh, I wanted to do that. Okay, but you didn't have a way to enable you to do it, so you couldn't. You want to trust but verify, part of that inspection mechanism, and the mechanisms that work for us that we reviewed with the ops meeting, the game day, direct engagement of people, mean time to mitigation, aggregation, centralized large impact, core leaders, the blameless COE, the tracked follow-ups, and generally that problem management process kind of end to end. So again, thank you so much. My name is Oren Nachman. Thank you again for spending the last 30 minutes with me. I look forward to engaging with you on this topic and to hearing about whether or not this works for you in your organizations, and how we can improve, because we're always learning as we continue on this journey. Thank you very much.